Welcome to UFHL Now! A close-up look at the ultimate fantasy hockey league. The most realistic fantasy gameplay. High stakes. High reward. Here's your host, the owner of Duckman's Domination in the UFHL, and the mighty Mallards of the UFAHL, Dean Millard.
Hello there, and welcome to another edition of UFHL Now, show 24, here proudly broadcast on the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network. My name is Dean Millard, and I am indeed the owner of Duckman's Domination and the mighty Mallards. Also, if you're into baseball, I'm the head of baseball for UFF Sports, and will be the commissioner of the Ultimate Fantasy League Baseball. So if you want to get on the diamond, I am definitely the guy to talk to about that. And we have an awesome show lined up for you. First of all, this is how you can get in touch with us. At UFSN Network, if you are interested in having a fantasy sports show on our network, daily, monthly, weekly, whatever, if you want to be part of the rotation, use that Twitter handle. You can also email UFSN at uffsports.com, and you can reach me and Duckman's Domination, at Ducks Domination on Twitter. On today's show, we're going to meet the men in charge of building a dynasty. The two guys running Dynasty for Ryan Malone. Ed Palumbo, the assistant GM, and Mark Yates, the GM, will join us on the program, and they will do it in a very unique fashion to kick things off. It had been a slow week in the UFHL until today. We'll also talk about some UFAHL call-ups. Owner meetings are on the way, and insider Larry Fisher, UFHL Insider, will bring us some of the things that are going on within the league. But one of the things I'm bringing up at one of the owner meetings to talk about is to start having a discussion about having specific positions within the UFHL. And I just took the liberty of throwing my team out there and what they would look like if we were to do this. Some guys play center and left wing, or left wing and center. But that's the way the roster kind of shapes up from my point of view just right now. The blue line looks a little bit more lopsided on the left side. But I think this is something that we should discuss. I'm not saying we should definitely do it. I'm not saying that it has to be done. I think we should have the discussion about it. I want to learn more. I want to find out, there has to be information about, what is a legitimate site that provides this information. There's a lot of left wing, right wing, center. There's not a lot of left D, right D information out there. So it's just something I want to get the conversation going with during one of the owner meetings, and I just wanted to throw up Duckman's Domination by position. So, we're not that far off. If a couple of these guys, we also need some more forwards, as you could see. I'm also advertising the fact that I need to trade some defensemen for some forwards, but we do have some guys that we can call up as well. So anyway, my thoughts on that, just to give you an indication of what it might look like. And again, I would be proposing this if it did come to a proposal, and I found there was enough interest, and I think that it can be done in the best and most effective way. It would be proposed for a few years down the road. So teams, like with any proposal, scoring, things like that, a lot of big changes have to happen down the road. So it gives a team an opportunity to, pivot in that direction, or focus on some of that, or go after specific players. So anyway, my thoughts only on that, and I'm sure we'll get into it a lot more during the owners' meetings as we go. All right, when we come back, we're going to chat with the two guys that are in charge of running Dynasty. This is UFHL Now.
You're watching the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, UFSN, your one-stop fantasy shop. Get in touch on Twitter at UFS Network. Email us, ufsn@uffsports.com.
Well, what a pleasure it is. It's been a pleasure to negotiate with these guys, and now to have them on the show is awesome. And we're going to start with some breaking news in a second, but really happy to welcome to UFHL Now the GM of Dynasty, Mark Yates, the assistant GM of Dynasty, Ed Palumbo, who's also the head of scouting for Fanalytica.tech. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. And Mark, I love that you have upstaged the Insider today. I mean, Larry is cooling his heels. Like, I think steam is coming out of his ears. He's in the lobby right now waiting to get on the show, and you have upstaged him with a trade. So, Mark, take away. You have the floor to announce this trade that you have just made.
And I'm going to pass it off to Ed. Ed, you go. You go. This is all Ed's doing, this whole trade.
Yeah, all my doing, sure. So the trade is, zoom in. So Dynasty is trading Sergei Bobrovsky. Who is it?
William Carrier.
William Carrier.
Michael Kempney. And was that it, Mark? See, Mark, yeah, why'd you kick it over to
me? we always have fun like this, but we receive in return Couture, Vlasic, a second-round pick, and Elliott from the what team?
From the Bentley Jacks.
Oh man, it's been a long day.
We are not great at breaking news.
You guys are better. You guys are better at making trades than breaking news. I will give you that. But let's talk about this trade a little bit. This is similar to the deal we worked out in the Jeff Skinner trade, except you guys are both swapping contracts that maybe are less desirable. Now, there's always a reason why you trade for that type of contract, and you guys are able to trade away a contract. So maybe, Mark, tell me what's attractive to you in this trade.
Well, first of all, we didn't remember anything because we have to shut down all the background programs so they don't ding while we're speaking here. So I couldn't read anything. But what was attractive about the trade is obviously we did want to give ourselves a little bit more flexibility without the Bobrovsky contract. So Elliott comes in, and Elliott's a very serviceable goaltender, etc. Then you have Vlasic. We believe that prior to the COVID year, Vlasic was one of the best defensemen in the league. And we think he'll return to that form. I don't really believe that COVID year was an accurate representation of many players around the NHL or hockey in general. And then Couture is a significant upgrade in our forward group. And then obviously we need to recoup picks if anybody looks at our draft picks. So we picked up another pick, and that was exciting as well.
Okay, so Ed, let's bring you into the conversation for this one a little bit, because our teams worked out a deal that was similar. So how important was it when you guys looked at this to say we've got to get rid of some of these contracts? Maybe the difference between the deal that we made for Skinner and involved Chromiak and some of those guys and this deal?
Well, it was earlier on. Mark and I had just hopped on with Ryan Malone's team with Dynasty, and our initial goal was to cut salary. So we were doing what we could to cut salary and acquire some assets that either could be used on the current team or traded in the future. So I believe at this point we've probably moved out some of the assets that we've already acquired in the last, how long have we been at this now, Mark? Two or 3 weeks. So we're making a lot of moves. Originally, like I said, our goal was to cut salary. Now we're at building the exact roster that we want to go into the season with.
Good stuff. Okay, Mark, do you want to add anything on that?
No, that's exactly it. When we first looked at all the contracts in the roster, it was look at these few that might hold us back and hinder us in the future, and let's see if we can work a way to move these contracts, and then ultimately, once you move those, you can proceed with your plan of how you want to construct a roster and or future rosters organizationally, etc.
So I want to chat just quickly about getting into the league. Mark, you and I had talked before you got in, actually on a different sort of UFFS kind of idea that we were chatting about, and obviously you're heavily involved in hockey. So the entrance for you into the league was interesting, and I found it funny because you were with the Monarchs briefly and then jumped over to Dynasty, and George, who was with the Monarchs, used to be my assistant GM. So it's almost kind of like history was repeating repeating itself, but just the opportunity to be a GM in one of only 32 in this league had to be tough to pass up. And if anybody should have understood it, it was George, because he left my AGM to become a GM. So just too much of an opportunity to pass up. And what really brought you into the league in the end?
Well, it was first and foremost, the league approached us regarding Instat, right? And that was very interesting. I think Ed and I had a deep dive into what we thought of everything for probably about 2 weeks. When we don't normally, to be honest, we don't think about deals probably that in depth. But that time with the UFHL, we really did, and we were really intrigued by it. Unfortunately, due to my responsibilities, my attention was taken away. But Ed really stayed focused upon it and actually updated me routinely about what the UFHL was doing, how it was growing. And then other friends that I had introduced, Brian Donaldson, et cetera, were calling me and expressing to me the growth of UFFS and UFHL, et cetera. So eventually my plate became a little clearer. Sales season is obviously dying down a bit at Instat. And I took a look at it and I said, this is really interesting. It mirrors what you want to be, what you have in true hockey, right? A real GM. And I talked to George, and I'm stumbling over my words, my apologies. He is a very good person, and I really appreciate everything he did. And he said, hey, you can come on and be my assistant GM. And I was ecstatic. And I think I talked to Ed for 48 hours straight about the league and bothered him and read all the rules. And it just happened that, nothing had been signed. The paperwork hadn't even been done. And I got a call from Ryan, and he said, hey, would love to have you be the GM and run things day to day. And I called George and said, hey, I think this is an opportunity I can't pass up. I think I have to do this. And in typical fashion, George was a gentleman and congratulated me and said, however I can support you, let me know. And, even to this day, we texted yesterday and have a good relationship. So I was very fortunate to, stumble into this role.
Well, and the mirroring the NHL, that happens a lot. Like, teams very rarely stand in the way of an assistant GM being promoted. And what that does is it fosters relationships. You need good relationships in this league. There are going to be GMs you're not going to want to deal with, and that's just like the NHL. Sometimes you might have to, but you're probably going to go back to the GMs you have those good relationships with or that you've worked with in the past. So I think that's a really, really, really smart move. And, Ed, when you look at this, what was the exciting part for you when you first found out about the UFHL?
When I first found out about the UFHL, I want to say it was back in January or February. And I originally actually had no interest at all in running one of the teams. I was very interested in the scouting piece, mostly because that's where my background is in hockey, scouting at lower levels and tier 2 and tier 3 juniors. So I really wanted to just get back into scouting in any way, shape, or form. So it was very interesting to me that Mark eventually bit the bullet and decided to come on. He was hesitant at first. A lot of it was due to his responsibilities with Instat and having a lot or having maybe too much on his plate sometimes. But when he decided to join in and wanted me to be his assistant GM, I felt like same thing. Working with Ryan Malone and Dynasty was something I could not pass up. So very appreciative to Mark and Ryan for the opportunity.
All right, so Mark, let's take a look at your roster now using Fantrax.com, and maybe let's just discuss how different this roster is than when you guys first took over, and what did you think of it? Your first initial reaction when you saw this roster compared to what it looks like now, Mark.
Top heavy. Very top heavy, right? So not enough depth is what I first thought, and some enormous contracts, and also a lack of depth with prospects and draft picks. So that's been something that we identified. Obviously, we spoke about that briefly at the beginning of the show, and that is something that we are still going forward trying to get a grip on, right? Is developing the future while also maintaining a competitive team currently, while being cap compliant. That was a big issue. I know, Dean, you were aware of that. That's hence the Skinner trade, hence the Bobovsky trade today. So we've been balancing a lot of things, and we do have an internal spreadsheet that I think is the most chaotic spreadsheet I've ever read in my entire life. And thankfully, Ed is a spreadsheet master, and he cleans it up for me because I get lost on it pretty quickly. But yeah, we've made a lot of moves, and we modeled it after a real NHL team. You're top heavy. Your payment should go to high end forwards, a couple high end defensemen, goaltenders. I personally believe are not as needing of high contracts to be productive in any league, including the UFHL. So that's how I built it, and we'll see how the season turns out.
Yeah, I want to know, Ed, just from your end, what were the negotiations, what were the discussions that you guys had with in-house, and you don't have to reveal all of them, but about how to go about getting rid of some of these contracts? Because the guys that ran the team before were named GM of the Year because they took this roster from literally nothing to somewhat contending, respectable team, and that was impressive. But then it got very bloated with some of the contracts and some of the great players that come with those contracts. But how much work went into this, Ed? What was it like negotiating within yourselves and then negotiating with other teams?
It was quite a bit of work, and I can tell you right off the bat that Mark and I did not keep an original copy of what the roster looked like, so we can't even compare it to now because we simply didn't care. We wanted to move rosters out. We wanted to move players out and bring in new guys, and we wanted to spread out the lineup a bit to create that depth that Mark was talking about. We've made quite a few moves, and honestly, the discussions between Mark and I, there were very, very minor arguments back and forth over how much each of us valued a certain player or a certain asset in the trade. But that's part of probably real life. Management between GMs, their assistants, and even their scouts. So it's the kind of discussions you have to have. And I think at the end of the day, we've done the job that we set out to do, but we're very far from finished. That's for sure.
That's so true. Go ahead, Mark. You want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's one of the reasons that I wanted to work with Ed is I trust him so much that I want to hear his argument. That's a very important thing, and that's the relationship we have that I want him to push back. I mean, I know he will when he feels strongly, so it's perfect. And I would also, that's actually what I wanted to say is how great of a job Ed does pushing my buttons to get me angry and great arguments.
We've worked together at Instat for 2 years, so working together in this role is certainly no different in terms of when and what we argue about. So,
well, but
the key is, Dean. The key is, Dean, is not creating a roster that wins 1 year. It's a roster that can, replicates or duplicates success every single year, right? So they did build it, and congratulations to them. I've never met those gentlemen. I'm sure they're great people. But I want to build something that is sustainable and that every summer we're not panicking because I have to cut $16 million in cap space to get down to the cap floor or to get cap compliant, and lowers my stress level, lets me enjoy it a little bit more.
Well, and that's why we tore ours down. We came in, we bought one of the original teams that was auto drafted. We threw it back into the redraft, and then we stripped that down because part of the fun of being in a fantasy league, especially one as amazing as this, is building something yourself. So we stripped it down to basically 2 or 3 quality players, get rid of all the rest. We know we're going to be drafting high again this year. 2022 draft is where we're going to get the nucleus of our team. And like you guys, we want to be contending every single year and not be in the situation where you're throwing away salary. But, it's interesting. We made that Skinner trade, and then I was also in on Vlasic as well, talking with Brendan last night. I just couldn't get the rest of my team to take on another potentially contract that we could be stuck with. I think that Vlasic could rebound as well. Certainly not going to be the Olympic-type player he was, as Father Time is undefeated, but I lost out on that, and I own the team. And within my group, I lost out on that decision, and you have to respect the other. Like as head of baseball and we're building the Ultimate Fantasy League Baseball, I told my team, I'm going to push back on your ideas because I want to make sure they're the best ideas possible. And I think that's the same with a hockey team. You can't take it personal when somebody pushes back. You know they're doing it for the good of the franchise, and that's a very important part, to have that kind of not all just yes men doing whatever. And then there's the ownership aspect. How involved is Ryan in the day-to-day things, and what's it like working with a guy who played with some of the guys that are now on your roster?
Ryan's been really great to work with. Always very calm and very, how do you say it? Very good guidance, right? And he does give us a lot of flexibility. He says, hey guys, if you think this is what we need to do, let's do it. But we always run things by him and ask him for his opinion, and he's always willing to give it. And as I said, very good guidance, and gives us also a bit of a leash to go and do things, but we always bring it back to the group and discuss things prior to a final decision being made.
Ed, what's it like
what are your
working?
thoughts?
I have not had nearly as many conversations with Ryan as Mark, but from the one phone conversation and the text group that we have back and forth, I can tell it's going to be fun. That's for sure. Ryan's definitely a good guy. He obviously knows hockey. He knows the market. He knows the players on our roster for the most part. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of fun to be had amongst the three of us, for sure.
Ryan might be the only GM in our league that can actually call up one of his players and have a conversation. Like, I know Colton Parayko a little bit. I still don't think he's going to take my call and talk fantasy, whereas Ryan Malone will be able to get Steven Stamkos on the phone and talk fantasy. That is a very unique relationship to have for an owner.
It's beneficial, right? We might have some insight, to Vlasic. Who knows? I don't know. I'm joking around, but no, Ryan's great, and Ryan's just a lot of fun, right? Just a lot of fun to talk to. Just a great person, great individual.
Well, quick story about getting insight. Gene Principe, who is on Rogers Sportsnet and covers the Oilers, told me a funny story one time back in the 80s. He was in a strip club actually across from Rexall Place, Northlands, and Wayne Gretzky was in there, and they were having a chat about this left winger that was going to come in and do maybe some damage. And Gene Principe, with his last pick in that draft, picked Mike Krushelnyski and won his draft. So you never just know where that insider information might just come from. And one of the places I think that we're all getting some great insider information from is Instat, and that's what I wanted to chat next. I threw this in here. I love this availability that is now being used by every GM and owner in the UFHL. I've put up this screen because he's a player that we drafted, in Nikita Chabrikov. I mean, I love the amount of things that you can watch on here and learn. So maybe take us through what we're seeing here on the screen, whether Ed or Mark, whoever wants to jump in here.
That's all Ed.
All right. So, so this is a basic player page. Any player that has played a certain number of games, they'll have tons of data to be looked at here. Whether you want to click on a quick playlist of their goals, all their points, down below, we have the statistics. That actions heat map is not based on where the player spends his time on the ice, but it's more so where most of the statistics occur on the ice. And then down below, you can see the career stats on the right-hand side, and then each and every game with the most recent one at the very top, where you can click on the full game video, the ice time, which just cuts out the stoppages of play into separate clips, and then all the players' shifts. And I think any scout who uses Instat, whether it's a UFF scout or GM or anybody there, or whether it's an NHL scout or OHL scout or anybody in the CHL, NCAA, they can all take value in just being able to click on a player's shifts and watch every single shift in a game or every single shift in a season. So that's where our bread and butter really is. The skills over there, whether or not someone agrees with what those skills are, that list is based on the player's top statistics. Everything's put into an algorithm that kicks out the player's top statistics and skills based on it. And as you can see here, we have a video player where you can edit video. You have your entire playlist of videos on the right-hand side. You can create your own playlists and folders based on whatever you want, really. Players, coaches will use it for pre-scouting. It's a really all-encompassing tool that we're very proud of where we are with it as a company.
I think it's awesome.
And to be honest, actually, this video you're watching, we're the only company in the world that has this video on their analytics or data platform, whatever you want to call us.
It's amazing. I love it. Like, I think this is just going to give us so much more intel. So I'm really looking forward to diving into that more. I love it. I love that you guys have partnered with the league. What was it about forming this partnership that excited you guys, and what more are you looking forward to with this partnership and of course the wonderful tool?
I can answer that. So since I've joined this whole UFF community, what I've noticed is there are some very knowledgeable people here. Not some, most of them are very knowledgeable people, and I think every single one of the people involved with UFF has a chance to turn this into something that could be more than just fantasy sports. It could be a job in the future. And at Instat, we're very happy to provide people with the platform when there's an opportunity for them to work at a higher level. So that's one thing I think that we take pride in, is being able to provide it to people who could use it, and use it to their own advantage or to a team's advantage. So yeah, that's my spiel about that, and how the partnership really excited me, at least.
What do you like about it, Mark?
Well, it's a signature or a sign of our belief in the actual UFHL, right? The fact that we believe that where this is going to be in 5 years is going to be rather influential in hockey, and we want to go along for that ride as a company. We want to support the league in its infancy, so that when it becomes a big-time league, not that it's not already big-time, but when it becomes larger, we're right there with them. And that's my goal, is to get in at the ground floor and then grow with good people, good companies. That's something I always look for at Instat and make sure that we're trying to accomplish.
Excellent stuff. Ed, I'm going to just let you wrap up, chat a bit about scouting, because you have been busy on the scouting side of things as head of scouting for Fanalytica.tech. I think you have the third most players now. So tell me a little bit about your strategy in that regard.
Well, my strategy was solely based on the fact that when I first joined in I believe, early February, I was behind the 8 ball on everybody. All the top picks from the last year's NHL draft, next year's NHL draft, the year after, a lot of them were taken. So my strategy was really corner the rest of the market, try to figure out if I can get as many players registered as possible, who are decent players, players I've heard about, players I've actually seen, players who have proven themselves at other levels, as everyone should be registering their players based on. I sort of had to make sure that if I wasn't going to get the top end players, I needed to make sure I was getting those guys that'll be middle to late round picks in the NHL draft. So it's really throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks. Is that the
Awesome.
phrase?
Yeah, that's how I cook spaghetti anyway. So
it sounded weird coming out of my mouth. Yeah.
This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, guys. Again, all the GMs should be using this Instat tool, and congratulations on the job that you guys have done already turning around this franchise. Best of luck moving forward. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much. And thanks for answering our text so that we can make some trades. We appreciate it.
No problem. Yeah. All right,
we're going to get forward to more of those.
Yeah, you betcha. We're going to get to the guy who we upstaged on this episode, the UFHL Insider, Larry Fisher. Hopefully, he'll have some of his own breaking news right after this.
Time to get the scoop on the UFHL with our insider, Larry Fisher. He's had lines in the water all week long. What will he reel in for us today? Let's dive in and find out what's going on with the UFHL now.
as I said it with the guys from Dynasty, quite a big trade, and they ended up getting the inside scoop on the insider. I don't know how that possibly happened, but your thoughts on Dynasty once again shedding some salary?
Yeah, breaking news. Before the insider could even get on the show, they dropped the big bombshell. But yeah, they were able to unload Sergei Bobrovsky, the $10 million man. Obviously, Florida's got Spencer Knight coming along, who looked good in his little bit of action this season. And you know, everybody thinks he's the goaltender of the future there. So what's going to happen with Bobrovsky's big deal, whether it gets bought out or Florida finds a way to move it? But Dynasty steps up and finds a way to move it in the UFHL, sending Sergei Bobrovsky off to the Bentley Jacks, who obviously have been the most active franchise of the offseason. The Bentley Jacks obviously see goaltending as an area that they wanted to really be a strength for them. Sergei Bobrovsky, you know, if he has a good offseason, he could still be an all-world, you know, top 10 goaltender in the NHL. So they look at it that way, and they're going to have a really good tandem with the Bentley Jacks. And on the flip side, you look at the Bentley Jacks, they were really trying to avoid the buyout with Marc-Edouard Vlasic. So this is kind of two buyout candidates, Bobrovsky and Vlasic, essentially swapped for each other. Bobrovsky maybe has the more fantasy value just because goaltenders are still rated, you know, with the fantasy scoring system. Bobrovsky will get more points than Vlasic, and even though he's $3 million more, Bentley Jacks see the value there. In exchange for taking on Vlasic for Dynasty. And again, Vlasic may get more value, Dean, if shorthanded time on ice, block shots categories, we'll talk about that in a bit, come into play. But certainly they also get Logan Couture, who's another big contract, but a very productive forward to help bolster the offense for Dynasty. And Dynasty did take back Brian Elliott. So they're running with a tandem right now of Aiden Hill and Brian Elliott. So goaltending, a bit of a concern for Dynasty, and now a strength for the Bentley Jacks, who obviously grabbed Darcy Kemper in the expansion draft from the Blades of Steel. They picked Darcy Kemper. He ended up in Colorado. So they have a tandem of Darcy Kemper and Sergei Bobrovsky for Dynasty. So that's looking good there. Or for Bentley Jacks, sorry. And then over with Dynasty, they have Logan Couture helping spark the offense now. And they also got a pick there. Dynasty was short on draft picks, so it's nice to always accumulate an extra draft pick here and there whenever you can.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the conversation with those guys, I was in that discussion for Vlasic last night with Brennan. Got voted down in our group. I didn't mind it because I think Vlasic, as I mentioned, might not be an Olympic-style player anymore, but still, if we make some scoring category changes, could be valuable. Certainly more valuable in the real world right now. I think there are NHL teams that would still take a flyer on Marc-Edouard Vlasic right now. But it was decided in our franchise, we just couldn't have Jeff Skinner and Vlasic, two guys that are making a lot of money that are, you know, probably going to be lower down in your lineup. Our hopes is that Skinner already gets bought out. I don't know if we can pray to two buyout gods in one season or not. So, but interesting move. And as those guys explained the reasons why they're looking, I think Bobrovsky is an interesting guy. I think you're right. I think Vlasic doesn't get bought out. I think Bobrovsky does get bought out, and same with Jeff Skinner. I don't think Marc-Edouard Vlasic is going to get bought out.
And just because he brings that, he's still a very capable defender. Again, like I said, Dean, he's not a sexy fantasy player. We've talked about Jacob Slavin a lot as a guy that, you know, plays a ton of minutes, a real shutdown guy. But doesn't hit a lot of the scoring categories in IDHL or for that matter in any fantasy league. Those are guys that, you know, as much as they're really valuable in the real world, for whatever reason, they don't have the same impact in fantasy. They just can't hit those categories. So again, you add shorthanded time on ice, even strength time on ice. You add block shots, which I think is definitely likely going to get voted in for the UFHL for this coming season. So I look at it that way, and I think Vlasic in the real world, like you said, Dean, much like a Jay Bouwmeester, guys like that, that are just they log a ton of minutes. Ryan McDonough being another guy who's at like $6 million in Tampa. You've seen the impact he had in the playoffs. There are these defensemen who are very serviceable in the real world, but they're just not a huge fantasy asset. And Marc-Edouard Vlasic is certainly one of those. But like I said, I think in the real world, I think a lot of teams would still. A lot of NHL teams would still be very happy to have a Marc-Edouard Vlasic coming to training camp this fall because he hasn't lost a step skating wise, and he still is a a premier shutdown defenseman, kind of like a Nicholas Chalmerson type too, right? Another guy that Duckman's actually had this past season as a guy that was helping you get to the floor and not providing much fantasy value, but for the real world teams, guys like that still have a lot of value. And that's part of what we're trying to do with these offseason owner meetings, Dean, is find a way to increase the value and better mirror the real world value for some of these stay-at-home defensemen.
Well, let's move to that now as we move into the offseason owner meetings. And man, for the amount of talk on Telegram about changes, there might not be as many as we might have anticipated as far as the amount of items tabled during the 3 meetings.
A bit disappointing, Dean, to be honest. Thought a lot more. A bit easy for the admin. We didn't have to spend as much time putting together the agenda, so that was nice. But from the league perspective, a lot of vocal GMs and owners on Telegram didn't submit their ideas, and therefore they won't be discussed at this year's meetings. But certainly thanks to the Battlehawks, Brutes, Crypto Knights, Duckmans, Generals, Monarchs, and Stallions. Those were the 7 franchises that did submit topics or proposed changes. And then, as you see here, Dean, we're looking at going to Saturdays for the owners' meetings, likely next Saturday. So August 28th would be the first one, and then 2 Saturdays in September. So we skipped this Saturday, which was obviously the UFAHL draft. All eyes are going to be on there tomorrow, and we didn't want to butt heads there because there is a lot of crossover franchises that are also involved in the UFAHL. And then we also skipped the Labor Day weekend in Canada because that's kind of the last weekend before back to school. A lot of families and stuff like to get away. So we gave that weekend off, and then we'll do September 11th and 18th. We'll send out all the voting topics following the meeting on the 18th, have a voting deadline of the following weekend, the 26th. And then the new changes or the voting results will be revealed. And any changes that are put into place will take effect on October 1st, which will be October 1st will officially be the first day of the new 21-22 season for the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League. And then, Dean, as you see here, we can get into the themes for the 3 meetings. The first meeting on August 28th will be all things scoring categories. A lot of the changes that were submitted, a lot of the ideas that were submitted were related to the scoring changes. Obviously, we've talked a lot about adding blocked shots, talked a little bit less about potentially adding in shorthanded time on ice or even strength time on ice. I know you're a big proponent of removing plus minus. I think you'll get some support for that. As well as a few franchises wanted to lower the scoring for penalty minutes and hits. And in exchange, maybe potentially adding drawn penalties or penalty drawn and fights. So maybe take down PIMs and hits and reward players that draw penalties and get in fights instead of taking minor penalties. So those are some of the ideas with scoring categories. Dean, I don't know if you want to weigh in on any of those.
Yeah, I think that there's some really, really smart people in this league, and I think there's going to be some really interesting ideas. I like the idea. I don't want to get rid of penalty minutes. If I had my own way, I would get rid of penalty minutes and only have penalties drawn in fights because, let's face it, how often does a tripping penalty change the momentum of a game? But drawing a penalty or getting into a fight, that is an actual part of the game. But I realize for fantasy purposes, you're trying to create value for these other players. So having those categories. I'll make my proposal about plus minus. I'll save that for the first meeting. But I'm also really interested in hearing, hopefully from a guy like Ryan Malone, who knows how hard it is to accumulate some of these stats and how easy it is to accumulate some other stats. And we have to really remember that every arena is different. There's not one guy watching these games and making all these decisions. There are many different guys. And unfortunately, people are imperfect and people have opinions and people are, value things differently. So we have to remember with some of these scoring categories, it'll be great to have a guy who has accumulated them and knows kind of the value according to the players. And, he's been pretty vocal at different times about that, about, how hard it is to get this, while how easy it is to get that. I'm gonna certainly value his opinion on that, but a lot of the other owners, I think, have put a lot of really hard work and some thought into this. So I'm really looking forward to seeing these things. And I'll just say this, I think with some statistical categories and changes, block shots, probably plus minus, maybe tweaking some things I think we can do. When we're talking about adding shorthanded time on ice or penalties drawn or fights, that for me is a year-long test. And then we look at it next off season to see what the data is. That's my opinion, but others will have their own. So that's what I think about the scoring categories, Larry.
I tend to agree, Dean. I think you do need that sample size, that data, running those test leagues to see what the actual impact is on fantasy points per game for certain players. If you want to bump up Marc-Edouard Vlasic or Jacob Slavin or these guys, or you want to bring down a Matt Martin or whatever the case, right? If you want to tweak these values, I think it really does. Having that data really helps make the case for those changes, but certainly get the conversations going at this off-season meeting and maybe present something at the mid-season meeting. Here's what I found over the first, 6 months or 5 months of this season kind of thing. And certainly all ears when Ryan Malone speaks, because he's speaking from experience, right? And he did make the point that it's a lot harder to get a shot on goal in the NHL than you think, and it's a lot easier to go around and bump into somebody and get a hit. So I think he'll be a big proponent in, the shot category outweighing the hit category, at least that way. But it'll be interesting to see where those conversations go and what, if any, voting happens on scoring categories. And then obviously rosters and transactions, Dean. There's a lot of topics here as well I can run through quick and then you can weigh in. But obviously the active roster configuration, as far as allowing 11 forwards and 7D instead of the standard 12 and 6, because a lot of NHL teams do run dress 7 defensemen a night now. So making that change, I think there'll be support there. Mirroring NHL rosters with specific positions. This is actually an idea you brought up on last week's UFHL Now show. I think that's going to be very interesting to see the feedback and sort of the timeline that you could work towards implementing that. Expanding rosters and protected lists, either by 5 or by 40. So going to either a 55-man total or a 90-man total. Both have been proposed as far as ways to carry more players than franchises currently do and get closer to the NHL 90-man reserve. Also, the waiver reclaim rule, Dean, which is if you reclaim a player off waivers in the NHL, you can automatically send them to the AHL. You don't need to create an open spot on the active roster, and you don't need to send them through another waiver thing. As long as you're taking them straight to the AHL, if Duckman's waives a guy, another franchise picks him up, and then that franchise waives him a month later, if Duckman's wins the waivers auction, they can send him straight to the protected list or to the UFAHL without having to clear waivers again and without having to waive somebody else to make room for him. That's how it works in the NHL. So mirroring that rule is an idea that came up. Also, another thing I think that will gain traction, Dean, is the delaying the deadlines from NHL to UFHL, either by 24 hours or 48 hours. So that would be your preseason waivers and roster deadline, as well as your trade deadline. Have those take place either 1 or 2 days after the NHL deadline, or at the very least end of day. So right now we've neared all the NHL deadlines. If the trade deadline's 3 p.m. in the NHL, it's 3 p.m. in the UFHL. The idea is at least give it till midnight of that day, Eastern time, or possibly give it, a 24-hour window till 3 p.m. the next day, or even 2 days later, to allow UFHL franchises to react to the NHL moves. And then the controversial one, Dean, that came up again is allowing SCO in trades. And it actually was surprising to me who proposed that. We'll save that for the owners' meetings, but it has come up again to allow straight SCO trades, so no hockey assets required, being able to buy and sell players essentially using SCO. So those are the rosters and transactions that topics we'll be talking about if you wanted to weigh in on any of those.
Yeah, the SCO thing is interesting because the way it was worded today, I thought it was really interesting because somebody said, well, the NHL would never let you just trade a player for SEO straight up. And I think it was Arlo that said, well, they would never let you involve cash anyway, like baseball does. Baseball involves cash, and it's, something that we're going to try to mirror in the UFLB, but the NHL doesn't allow that. Now, the NHL also allows future considerations, and there's a lot of things that we want to do And I think we can do really well. There's some things we just can't do, or it has to be tweaked a little bit, like our draft auction. That's a big part of the revenue for prize pools and things like that. That's why we don't have a straight draft. But I think we can. I'm interested in this. I've kind of gone back and forth on this one myself, and so I'm not sure kind of where 100% I am on that one, but I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have said and have to say, and trying to be open-minded about it. And then, there's a couple of things I just want us to discuss as owners, and I know that's kind of in the third meeting that you guys have planned.
Yeah, the third meeting is all about topics and discussions, so not changes that weren't submitted necessarily as we need a resolution of this next season. It's just sort of food for thought meeting, I guess you could say, including reviewing the Klein Cup playoffs and the playoff draft, playoff format, how the playoff payouts work, just all things playoffs as a topic. Again, reviewing the entry auction, how did that work? How, from an owner's perspective or owner's point of view? The free agent frenzy auction, do we want to continue to do a frenzy? Do we want to do individual free agents? How do we want to do that? The pros and cons to adding a third round for the entry auction. I know there was some talk actually about removing the second round, but that actually wasn't submitted as a proposal. So we won't be talking about removing the second round, but we will be talking about potentially adding a third round somewhere down the road. It would obviously have to start, I guess it could start at any time, because every franchise could just add a third round pick at any time. It's a lot easier to add picks than take them away.
Sure.
And then higher minimum increments for auctions. Some people felt the auctions drag on too long at a $5 increment. Let's bump it to $10 and speed up the process, get the bidding going a little faster, so we're there for less time going back and forth in $5 increments. Harsher penalties for illegal rosters. In some cases, it's only the player that you forfeit the fantasy points for the specific player involved in the illegal roster move. Should we be forfeiting the entire roster's points? Which we do in some cases, but depending on the infraction, sometimes it's just the player involved, like it was with Jace Harlock of the Yetis, whereas Yakov Trenin with the Monarchs forfeited the entire franchise's points. So better defining or figuring out how to punish illegal rosters, perhaps harsher penalties. And then there is a UFAHL affiliate issue with the Monarchs. They've been trying to buy their AFAHL, their American League affiliate, and have been unsuccessful. They actually transferred the payment to the current owner, and he's been non-responsive. So they'd like to the league intervention or the competition committee intervention to expedite that process and make sure that they have control of their American League affiliate. And then last but not least, Dean, introducing the new competition committee for next season, which, of course, the way we've done it is myself, Larry Fisher, and then the 6 franchises. So 7-member committee, 6 franchises, and myself. The franchises that finish 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30 every season. So it's a different group every year. As you can see, it would be the Outlaws, the Gators, Strong Island, Snipers, Warriors, and Tornadoes. And a couple of those actually were already on the competition committee in the initial season, and then some new faces as well. So that would be the group. That is optional, Dean. If any of them don't want to be on the competition committee, say Strong Island passed or on the opportunity at 15th, they would then go to 14th and 16th, and whoever wanted it out of those two. So, but we try to get the parity or the spread the standings out on the competition committee. So it's not all the big spenders or all the small market franchises that are making these decisions. Everybody has a say throughout the standings, top to bottom. So that's where we're looking at for the 3 owners meetings coming up, starting next weekend, the end of August, and then 2 more in September.
Yeah, I think it's good to have one meeting where we just discuss things. We don't have to make any decision. We just get opinions, and then you can maybe talk about something at the mid-season owners meetings of how we want to do better. So I think that's really important to have that. And I was honored to be on the competition committee this year. Thankfully we didn't have a whole lot of things, but there were some issues and some major ones. And, the issue involving the Yetis was obviously a big one. And then some of the trades, and some of the things that we, didn't have to rule on, but just discussed within ourselves about, should this team be on a watch? Remember when Hernan Salas was going to sell the Chilean sea bass. and what was going on there was a lot of talk. Okay, we have to monitor. So it's an important position, and I think it's in a position that if you don't think that you're going to have time or you don't want to be, do not do it, because it's an important position, because you could be impacting a franchise or a person's future, like we did, unfortunately, with the Yetis, where we had to rule in a fair but punitive way.
Yeah, exactly, and that cost Colin Mills, obviously, his role as GM of the Yetis, with the penalty that was handed out there on the Jace Harlock LTIR situation, and then certainly dropped them a few spots in the standings, although Scott Lowater was able to rally the troops and get him back up to, I believe, 5th place in the end. Or 4th place in the end, but certainly, I guess they were 4th because the Outlaws were 5th. But I think the competition committee serves a good purpose, and it also gets a lot of conversation going in a separate group on Telegram with these owners involved, just on, what are some changes. Like, we always are discussing in those groups too, just kind of not only what's happening in the league, but what could we improve in the league. If a topic comes up in the owners group, sometime we'll have a break-off chat in the competition committee. What do you think about this? And is this something that, the competition committee would want to propose for future seasons as well? So, but at the same time, Dean, as you know, the competition committee's hands are sort of tied with something like a cash trade. We had a lot of times when the trades came out and were announced, people came at us saying, why did you approve that? How did the competition committee let this pass? And with cash trades or score coin trades, the only rule is there has to be a hockey asset on each side. And score can be used as a sweetener or balancer, but there's no limit on score. So you can put your worst hockey asset in and a whole bunch of score, and that is still a sweetener. No matter, there's no limit on score. So if it sweetens it enough to get Connor McDavid for, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, you can do that trade. So again, it's up to the franchises to propose changes to that system to tighten those rules. But the only proposal that came in, Dean, after all the squabbling about score coin trades was, let's get rid of it altogether and allow a free-for-all with no rules on score coin trades, and allow them to be traded straight up for players, buying and selling players. So again, for all the feedback we got on people up in arms over trades involving score coin, nobody made any proposal to change or tighten those rules. So again, it is what it is, and they can make those proposals next season if they don't like it again, if the current rules remain. But that pretty much sums it up for where we're at heading into the 3 owners meetings.
Yeah, and first, just on a final note on that, it's the competition committee. That's the name of it. It's not the bad trade or terrible lopsided trade. Like, the competition committee isn't there to save you from a bad trade that you accepted and then you have trader's remorse. They are there to make sure there's no under the table fishy stuff going on. There's no league. I do not like it when fantasy leagues, have the other owners vote on the trade. Nobody should be protecting the weak link in a league. Nobody. David Attenborough in a nature show doesn't stop the lion from getting the weak gazelle. It's the nature of things that happen. So it's not the bad, dumb trade committee. It's is this trade legal and on the up and up? So just want to make that perfectly clear. When bad trades are made, don't look at the competition committee because one GM got fleeced by another, which doesn't happen. Maybe that happened a little bit in the early going of this. It does not seem to be happening anymore. Sure, teams overpay, and the pick we made, the offer we made for the 22 pick from Blizzard, we went aggressive on that one. So there are better deals happening, and that's why the competition committee is there, not to make sure the trades are fair by any means. So I just wanted to mention that. But let's move on to Scout Pool and potential credentials. We're looking at really helping the scouts out right now.
Yeah, Dean, I think the Scout Prize Pool is an idea that has come up that we'll be discussing amongst the scouts and amongst the founders as well, because there would be a percentage that goes to platform development currently that would be going to the Scout Prize Pool if we make these changes. But certainly an idea has come up that there's ways to compensate the scouts during that 3-year development window, and ways to reward the scouts for having success in the futures auction, because they bid on these prospects in the 3 years out in the futures auction, and they don't get a profit on them until the entry auction 3 years later right now, because we don't have an OHL league or, a USHL league or, any of those developmental leagues up and running yet. So the way this idea would work with the scout prize pool would be you would reward, say, the highest scoring 2006 player in the WHL next season gets 50 score coin to the scout, or whatever the case, right? You'd set up parameters. Whichever scout owns the player who won MVP in this junior league gets a payout of some sort. Just ways to, but we probably, what I'm thinking, Dean, is we'd probably keep it to the draft classes, to those age groups, so that you're always rewarding them throughout those development years until there's leagues up and running that reward those scouts for having those players. So certainly your draft year guys, any draft year players that won awards in the real world, maybe if they were all-stars in the real world, but I think we could really narrow it down. I'm not a huge fan of the NHLE stat that's been created with algorithms as far as projectability to the NHL, which player from every junior league around the world is most projectable to the NHL. But some people live and die by that category, NHLE. So maybe you reward, okay, who's got the highest NHLE in the Swedish junior league? That player projects, according to data, that they're going to be the best NHL player in the future. Give them a little payout for whichever scout owns that player. But basically, the 3-year window when you bid on or open market register players for 2024, and then also the guys that are futures for 2023, and the guys that are now draft prospects for 2022. Those 3 age groups, there's no way to monetize or get a return on investment for scouts until they get to the entry auction. So just find some ways to reward scouts for making the right investments on those 3-year age window for developmental seasons. That's the idea there. And then the other side that we're talking about with scouts, and I've been looking into a little bit, Dean, is potential credentials. I know Nelson Martin's reached out about it. He'd love to get into some OHL rinks and scout on behalf of UFFS, right? We are the UFFS scouts, and you look at our scouting roster of 57 scouts now, and we got some real high-end guys with a lot of experience. A lot of the scouts we have, even myself included, we have credentials from other agencies that we've worked for, or even our home rinks. They've kind of grandfathered us because we've been around for 15 years or whatever. But some of our scouts are new. They're coming to us, and they're coming to us wanting to learn how to scout. They're aspiring scouts, and they want to get into scouting. And part of that is getting into the rink and doing the eye test and not having to pay to be there. So certainly we've put out some feelers as far as how would credentials work and how can we go about getting them. Obviously, I have some connections. Sam Costantino is going to help us a bit in Ontario as well. But the initial feedback I've got from putting out some feelers is that it's very tight right now with COVID restrictions. Obviously, any scout who wants to scout has to be fully vaccinated. That's basically, if you're entering a building this year in the CHL, the Canadian Hockey League, you're going to need to be fully vaccinated. So the COVID factor there. And then, and also even with the fully vaccinated, it sounds like they're still going to be restricting the number of scouts, and maybe only scouts that are affiliated with NHL agencies or certain, scouting groups, like maybe the Athletic, or maybe, they're going to really be pick and choose and be a bit picky on who they allow in the buildings for this first season, especially in the OHL where they're just reopening. They didn't have a season last year. They don't want any chance of any sort of outbreaks or shutdowns. So I think scouting credentials is going to be a tough one to get for this coming season, but we're starting to develop those relationships or renew those relationships for those of us that already have them, and try and get some new names. Some of our new scouts that don't have credentials, we'd like to get them in the building as well.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back into some WHL buildings. So that is good. And you're right. I've been lucky enough to have I guess we call it a press pass or a scout pass or whatever it's been for 22 years or however long I've been there. So you kind of take that for granted sometimes when you think about getting back into the building during these COVID times. So hopefully that certainly changes up. One of the ways that franchises can get better, and we've talked about a lot, is having an affiliation with a scout and having a relationship with a scout, but also having a really good relationship or owning your own UFAHL team. And that certainly has paid off for a few teams, and probably a lot more action on that front as the offseason continues and we get closer to October.
It's funny you bring that up, Dean. Right when we were coming on the air, I got a text from Matt Gunn from the Gators, their GM, saying, how do I move a guy from the Caymans to the Gators? And I think the guy is going to be Vladimir Kachev, a Russian star, a little guy who actually almost signed with the Oilers way back when, I think 7 or 8 years ago already. Yeah. Craig McTavish tried to sign him, but he wasn't eligible to be signed from the Young Stars tournament in Penticton, where he was standout. He went back, dominated the KHL for a number of years, and now he's sort of this year's Artemi Panarin, or whatever you want to say, Nikita Gusev. He's coming over from the KHL where he's had some starring roles, and the Los Angeles Kings signed him. He was drafted in the UFAHL, the American League draft, by the Caymans. Matt Gunn did the drafting there, drafted him there, and he's looking to move him up to the Gators now. So I'm going to explain to Matt how to do that. But for everybody else, there is an option when you're if you own the franchise in both leagues, there is a franchise-to-franchise transaction, which Dean can explain, because the Duckman's Domination just did that this week as well. They brought up Gustav Forsling and Ryan Lomberg from the Mighty Mallards to Duckman's Domination. And they didn't unpack their suitcases, but more on that later, Dean. But yeah, Gustav Forsling and Ryan Lomberg were nice additions, temporary additions, able to get some value for them for Duckman's Domination. Blades of Steel have also done a couple recent promotions. They got Tanner Jeanette, who had a former Moose Jaw Warrior who had an emergence with the Nashville Predators, and Nathan Bastian, who had a decent first year in New Jersey and was selected by Seattle in the expansion draft. So Tanner Jeanette and Nathan Bastian came up for Blades of Steel. And then it got me interested, Dean, because with Blades of Steel and yourself doing the promotions, this is the time where, guys are making that step to the next level coming into training camp. And who else is down in the UFAHL awaiting a potential promotion? And so for the upcoming season, I went through and I found 28 notables. We don't have to mention them all, Dean, but we can highlight some of them. Anybody else who wants to look can just go on the platform and look through the UFAHL rosters. But one that stands out to me is Michael Bunting. I think the Generals will be calling him up from the Corporals. He had a good season in Arizona. Now he's back home in Toronto playing for the Leafs, reunited with Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe from their junior days. And Sault Ste. Marie, I think Michael Bunting's an obvious one for the Generals. They also have Jeffrey Vale, who is kind of one of those hitters, penalty minute energy guys in San Jose, got a little bit of time. He's there with the Corporals. A guy like Frederick Goudreau, I think from the Schooners to the Blizzard. Frederick Goudreau, I sort of mocked the Yetis when they took him and fairly early in the playoff draft, but he looked good. He looked good for Pittsburgh in the playoffs, and now I'm pumping his tires, saying I think he's a guy that's a candidate for promotion from the Schooners to the Blizzard. Jacob McDonald, he's been he spent all of last season in the NHL with Colorado. They've moved out some blue liners, Colorado. I think they did bring in Ryan Murray, but I think Jacob McDonald's probably an NHL player at this point. So this is one where the owner of the UFAHL franchise is not the same owner as the UFHL. So West Coast Express would have to make a deal with the Minotaurs, their affiliate. I believe they have some sort of working relationship contract. They set up that affiliation ahead of time to agree to be affiliates. So I think they'll be able to get their guy in Jacob McDonald if they want to call him up at any point. Another guy in the same situation, Dean, is Joel Hanley. I think the Yetis can call him up from their UFAHL affiliate. He also spent all of last season in the NHL with Dallas, suited up for 35 games. He looked good the previous year when Dallas went to the final in the playoffs. He actually had a lot of ice time in that playoff run. So, and you can go on and on down the list. I mean, we talked about Vladimir Kachev. There are some interesting ones, Dean, there. Guys like Sven Barchi, who signed with Vegas, who's been buried in the AHL, and now he might get a chance to get back to the NHL with Vegas. If so, the Thunderbirds have him, so the Battlehawks would be looking at possibly calling up Sven Barchi, which is kind of a cool story because obviously Mick Portoni is based in Switzerland, and he would have watched Sven Barchi grow up, so he could potentially have him there. And the other one that stands out to me, Dean, is Andrew Ladd. And this one we're going to talk about, or I guess in the owners' meeting, a bit of a dispute between the Monarchs and their UFAHL affiliate. But Andrew Ladd was traded to Arizona. He might get a chance to play this season. I don't know if he's going to go on LTIR and retire or not, but if he wants to keep playing, Arizona is probably the easiest roster to crack for forwards in the NHL. So if Andrew Ladd makes a comeback, the Monarchs might want to call him up, in which case they would have to get a deal in place with their AHL affiliate, the Thunderstorm, and that's an ongoing battle. But those are some of the names, Dean, that pop out for me going up and down the rosters from the UFAHL to UFHL, guys that are in line for potential promotions for the upcoming season.
All right, so let's move along quickly now to the trade that we kind of, I guess, alluded to. I think we're trying to get a luggage sponsor like the Bentley Jacks with these kind of moves that we made this week. But this is what, we called these players up already knowing there was some interest in them, knowing our roster is pretty full already. I mean, I've already got too many defensemen right now, so we're going to have to do something. Having said that, I traded a forward for a defenseman that we'll talk about. But this is a deal that I look at as a potential 2022 trade that will pay off for us. If Oscar Klefbom can somehow come back and start passing the puck to Connor McDavid in 2022 at $4.1 million, that fits perfectly in with us. And the score coin, if somehow score coin goes up to $1 in the next little while, then a $50 investment in a UFAHL team nets me $1,000. So an eye to the future definitely on this trade.
Yeah, I think this could be a win-win for Duckman's. Whether Klefbom comes back, it's probably an obvious win if he's his old self. And if not, if assuming Scorecoin continues to trend up, which got a nice bump today, you hope to see that Scorecoin pay dividends, and certainly offset the entire cost of your UFAHL franchise. For the Stingrays, though, Gustav Forsling had an emergence in Florida, earned himself some job security there, a few years, I believe a 3-year contract. He's going to get some probably power play 2 time in Florida, so kind of get the Keith Yandel role there. So I think this could be a win-win, but either way it works out for Duckman's. It'd be a big win if Klefbom's back, but if not, I think getting 1,000 score coin in any trade is a nice number to bring back to the bank as well.
Yeah, and then we dished Ryan Lomberg to the Mystics for Jacob Zaboral. They have been after me about Ryan Lomberg for seemingly forever, it seems. So, again, a guy that I'm looking to the future. I'm not sure what is stalling Zaboral's career in Boston, but maybe there's some room for him. I know they're looking at some young players, and this is a guy that if he works out, great. If not, then I'm not going to be too heartbroken out of it. So a bit of a gamble, but there's no guarantee Ryan Lomberg is going to be a top 6 guy in Florida either. He's that the depth is steadily improving each day.
Yeah, I think Ryan Lomberg is the Matt Martin type guy that's going to run around and bang into a bunch of people and rack up a bunch of fantasy points based on hits. They're looking at him that way. I think Jacob Zaboral obviously still has more potential for career-wise, and I do think that it's a make or break this year in Boston because he's no longer waiver exempt. He's got to be on the NHL roster. Boston's brought in some other D. There's going to be some new looks there. So if he's not progressing higher in Boston's depth chart, I think there's a good chance of a trade or potentially even him hitting the waiver wire in the NHL and another franchise giving him a fresh start. And Boston might want to move him along as well if they don't see him becoming the player that they thought they were getting when they drafted him over a guy like Matt Barzal back in 2015 when Boston had the 3 picks in a row. So certainly, like I said, the UFAHL to UFHL promotions, both Gustav Forsling and Ryan Lomberg, short stays with Duckman's, but nonetheless bringing back guys that could potentially help Duckman's in the upcoming season.
All right, well, we kind of chatted that it might be a slow week, and then a couple of trades, the one that we broke before, and then this one we can talk about as well. But up until kind of today, it was a bit of a slow week. Take us through this trade between the Yetis and the Monarchs.
Yeah, thanks to Mark Yates and Ed Palumbo, the Dynasty guys, as well as Brennan of the Bentley Jacks for giving us that blockbuster to talk about off the start. But prior to that, there had only been the 3 trades, just the 2 that Duckman's made that we just covered. And then this trade, the Yetis to the Monarchs, which was Barclay Goudreau, who got the new contract with the Rangers, north of $3 million cap hit, and Ryan Hartman, 2 guys, again, that run around, get a lot of hits, rack up some PIMs. To the Monarchs for George to get some forward depth, and the Yetis bring back Nikita Zadora, who actually has a arbitration hearing scheduled for next week. He was traded from Chicago to Calgary this offseason, so he's going to be a Flame this year, and he's another physical guy. And then Colton Dock, the younger brother of Kirby Dock, who is a entry auction selection for the Monarchs, is on his way to the Yetis. So a 2-for-2 trade involving a lot of guys that throw a lot of hits, and we'll see how their value evolves in the UFHL going forward.
All right, a couple more quick topics to get to. The bio deadline is looming, so people need to be aware of that.
next Saturday, Dean, August 28th at midnight Eastern, will be the buyout deadline for the UFHL. That is 48 hours after the last scheduled NHL arbitration hearings on August 26th, those being the aforementioned Zadorov and Travis Sanheim. So if buyouts are not submitted or announced by that deadline, players can't be bought out until next offseason when the NHL buyout window opens again. And as we know, Dean, now going forward, the same cap recapture rules apply to UFHL franchises. So if you're considering buying out a player, you should definitely consult with the cap-friendly buyout calculator tool to determine the cap implications. The far right column, when you open up the buyout calculator, shows you the cap recapture penalty. In other words, the cap hit that carries forward with your franchise. It's always twice as long as the remaining contract. So if they have 2 years left on their contract, you pay them for 4 more years. So it is cost prohibitive to do buyouts, but in some cases, just to get that little bit of breathing room from the top of the cap ceiling, it is worth it for a buyout. But if anybody's thinking about doing buyouts, your deadline is next Saturday, August 28th at midnight Eastern.
Okay, time for some insider advice, and you're going to talk about a real, you just talked about that buyout calculator. There's some really good tools out there for GMs to use. I know the Instat. I absolutely love it. I've just been watching Nikita Zadora videos forever, so I love the Instat tool. And here's another tool that we're going to talk about, the waivers calculator, which is, so important. I've had GMs reach out to me asking for specific guys that are waiver exempt on my roster, and you can do that here with your own team and others.
Yeah, we talked about the buyout calculator and certainly the waivers calculator as far as insider advice goes, Dean. Now is the time to really start utilizing that waivers calculator. Everybody should have a spreadsheet or some tracking device of your own roster, and you should be including in there their waiver status, how many seasons or how many games played they have left. Because there are a lot of players that were waiver exempt last season. We're talking like probably 100 players across the league that are no longer waiver exempt this year, and they need to clear waivers prior to the start of the season in order to start on your protected list. Even if they ended off there, you need to send them through waivers again. So there are some franchises. I know, I believe Rock Republic is one that I looked at, among others, where you look at the roster and their active roster is full, and there's going to be 3 or 4 of those young players that are quality guys that are going to have to go through waivers and get past the Duckman's Domination and the Tornadoes and stuff. And much like the NHL, Dean, waivers is all about parity, giving players opportunity. If they've been in the league long enough, we don't want other franchises to hoard them or hoard them on the protected list. So certainly right now is the time for your own franchise. You should be looking at using this tool, checking every one of your players on your active roster, on your 50-man roster, because again, in the offseason, it's 50-man. It's not active and protected. They're all just coming to training camp as a 50-man roster. So figure out who's waiver exempt, who's waiver eligible. And then also, it doesn't hurt if you're bored. If these are the dog days of summer and we only have 4 trades in a week, Dean, which is, less than 1/3 of what we normally see, maybe it's time to start checking out the status of your rivals' players on the waivers calculator. See who they might be losing to waivers, and then hit them up saying, hey, I noticed this guy's not going to make your active roster. You're probably going to, I'm going to put a claim in on him on waivers in the waivers auction. So why don't you trade him to me now and get something in return as opposed to just the score you'd get back from a waivers auction. So, but yeah, some franchises do have several young players that are no longer waiver exempt for next season or the upcoming season. And so I think it's a good time to really get in here and go through the list and make sure the status of your players, Dean. And when you do click on a player, it actually has 2 columns. It's important to know if either one of those columns say none, the player has to go through waivers. So because in some cases it's by season and in some cases it's by games played. So you have to keep an eye on both of them. And with the games played factor, Dean, they could be waiver exempt at the start of the year, and halfway through the year they get to the number of games, and then they have to clear waivers halfway through the season to go down. So it's something you have to be monitoring at all times. But this tool will save you from getting a fine situation like the Monarchs did last season with Yakov Trenin, and can also help you identify trade targets as guys that might not make the cut for other teams' active roster heading into that preseason roster deadline.
Well, and that's the thing about this league and being involved in this professional fantasy hockey league. You either need to delegate that to somebody and say, okay, you know, part of your job description within this team concept is you're identifying trade targets using this calculator, or, you know, you're doing it yourself, and whether you kind of have to do it as a team, but you always have to be identifying. So I'm a bit of an old school guy. I'm not going to show you the information on this list, but this is a notepad full of player targets that I'm looking for. This page right here has 50 defensemen on it that I would like to target. So we're always evaluating the players that we want to go after, and we also do have a spreadsheet. Don't get me wrong, it's not pencil and paper over here, but my spreadsheet's not as good as some of the other. I've seen some of the other guys' spreadsheets. Alex LeBlanc, he's got a great one for his squad going over there. So what I'm saying is you always have to be active. You know, whether that's, you don't always have to be making trade proposals, but you always have to be staying on top of the game, not just what your roster is doing, but what is the other rosters doing, and how can you take advantage of it. That's what we did this offseason with teams that you know, have to get to the cap. And that's what we'll do, as you mentioned, in free agent auctions, because we have some players that we can just waive, and if they go to the minors, we are okay with that. That's why our roster is probably going to be 32nd again. But you have to identify these ways of making your team better that aren't just trades or draft. Like, you just can't rely on trading and drafting. You have to be active in other areas. And you'll see the GMs that are successful in that, I think, rise to the top.
Certainly the GMs that are looking to the future at all times, having that foresight. And again, this is a slower time of the year. Now is the time to double check that you know who's waiver eligible and waiver exempt on your roster, but also start looking at other franchises and seeing, you know, hey, this guy, either I'm going to be able to put a bid on this guy in a waivers auction, or, you know, maybe I can inform the owner who's asleep at the wheel and hasn't checked the waivers calculator. I can tip him off and say, hey, I'm looking at your roster. This guy is no longer waiver exempt for next season. You can't start him on the protected list without sending him through waivers, even if he was on the protected list and last year, he has to clear waivers in order to start there every season. Yes. So, you know, I can tip them off and say, hey, you know, here's a guy that you're going to potentially lose. Why don't we make a deal for him now? And then you beat the rush and avoid the auction as well. You don't have to spend money, but maybe you give him a second round pick or a lower level prospect in order to get somebody they were going to lose for nothing or in exchange for score coin in the auction. So, and some franchises, Dean, they might rather take the score coin if they know they have a good young player that's not going to fit their budget, and they might get William Lagesson got $155 bidding war last year in the preseason waiver thing. If they have a good player, they think, I'll take $200 instead of a second round pick. They might let those players go to waivers auction. So I think that preseason waivers deadline is going to be very interesting. Just noticing, again, maybe I'm too bored. Sometimes I go through these players and see who's going to be waiver eligible this year. But I think there's going to be some interesting names coming on the waiver wire unless they're moved between now and early October.
Yeah, should be lots of ways to build the franchises for teams that are on the way up, and then those teams that are already up there will have to get creative to at least get something in return, whether that's score coin or some sort of asset. All right, Larry, busy weekend ahead for the UFAHL. I know a lot of our UFHL owners are involved in that, so best of luck to all of them. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, Dean, looking forward to that UFAHL draft starting tomorrow. It's going to be an epic production. The live show is going to be great. And then as well, just to see the results of this draft, because it's something that's never been done in fantasy before. And one last thing, Dean, I was just going to close with was the Scout prize pool. When we were talking about that, there was another recommendation that came up that I skipped over in my mind when we were going through, but that was to do a contingency fund or a reserve for Scouts, because they felt that they aren't getting compensated enough in that second round. So maybe instead of a prize pool, it goes into a contingency fund or a reserve. And then they set a price amongst the Scouts. They vote prior to the entry auction. What's the lowest the second round pick should sell for? Okay, it's $80. Then any prospect that sells for less than $80 in that second round, the contingency fund would top up the Scout who owns that prospect to the minimum amount that they think is worth a second round pick. So the Scouts are getting creative. They might not want a prize pool. They might prefer the contingency fund, but certainly we're looking at potentially getting some more revenue, driving more revenue back into the Scouts' hands.
This is UFHL Now with Dean Millard. Get in the game, where you own the game.
Well, loaded show today. 3 different guests, and things are happening all the time, even when we think it's slow. There's a lot to talk about in the UFHL. This weekend, huge for the platform, the UFAHL draft. Can't wait to watch that. I believe it starts at 9:30 Mountain Time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, and that'll be on aosports.tv. And then who knows? We've got the owners' meetings and more trades and more movement and more excitement in the UFHL now. Thank you very much to Mark Yates and Ed Palumbo of the Dynasty franchise, and of course UFHL Insider Larry Fisher for their time. And thanks to you for watching this production. We have more great shows still to come here on UFSN, and a new football show that'll be added next Wednesday. You will not want to miss that for sure. For Larry Fisher, for Mark Yates, for Ed Palumbo, I'm Dean Millard of Duckman's Domination and the Mighty Mallards. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. We'll chat next week.
UFHL Now is produced by DM Productions. To get in touch, head to www.podcastalley.ca.